Every government on Earth lives beyond its means. The United States carries a debt burden of $38 trillion. Japan shoulders $9 trillion. China, Germany, France, even the wealthiest oil kingdoms, all drowning in obligations that stretch into the hundreds of billions. The entire planet owes $315 trillion, a number so vast it dwarfs the combined output of every economy on Earth. But here's the question that should make your blood run cold. If literally everyone owes money, who exactly is getting paid? The answer isn't what you think, because when you trace the paper trail, when you follow every bond and every promissory note to its final destination, you discover something that defies logic. The world doesn't owe money to some mysterious external force. It owes money to itself. But that circular relationship isn't an accident. It's the most sophisticated financial trap ever constructed, designed by brilliant minds across centuries to ensure that debt can never truly be eliminated. This isn't conspiracy theory nonsense. This is documented history. The meetings happened, the contracts exist, the mechanisms are operating right now, in broad daylight, moving trillions of dollars every single day. And once you understand how the system actually works, you'll realize why $38 trillion in American debt isn't a crisis to be solved. It's a feature, not a bug. It's working exactly as intended. Let me show you how we got trapped in this web and why every single government on the planet is now caught inside it with no way out. Before 1694, kings borrowed money the way normal people do. They'd approach wealthy merchants or nobles, promise to pay back the principal plus interest, and either honor the agreement or default. If they couldn't pay, creditors lost their money. Kings found new lenders. The system was risky but contained. Debt was temporary, either repaid or written off. Then everything changed. England was at war with France, burning through gold faster than they could collect taxes. The treasury was empty. Traditional lenders were refusing new loans because English kings had a nasty habit of defaulting when things got tough. That's when William Paterson, a Scottish merchant with a history of failed schemes, approached King William III with a revolutionary proposal. Paterson would organize a group of wealthy investors to lend the government £1.2 million, roughly $300 million in today's money. But here's where it gets interesting. The loan would never be repaid. Instead, the government would pay interest forever. 8% annually, guaranteed by Parliament, backed by the power to tax citizens. And to manage this arrangement, Paterson proposed creating an entirely new institution called the Bank of England. The mechanics were brilliant. Merchant lenders would deposit their gold with the bank. The bank would lend it to the government. The government would pay interest from tax revenue. The bank would distribute that interest to the original lenders. But the principal would never be touched. The debt was permanent by design. Why would wealthy merchants accept this deal? Because the interest payment was guaranteed by law. As long as England could tax its people, money would flow, and the banknotes they received in exchange for their gold could be traded like currency. They were better than money because they paid dividends. Parliament approved the scheme in 1694. For the first time in human history, national debt became a permanent feature of government, not a temporary problem to solve. Here's what nobody explains about why this was genius for the bankers. The government paid £96,000 in interest every year on that original loan, forever. The merchants had essentially purchased an annuity from the government. As long as England existed, as long as it could extract taxes from its citizens, the payments would continue. And if they wanted their capital back, they could sell their position to someone else. The debt was transferable but never eliminable. But Paterson's real innovation came next. The Bank of England was granted the right to issue paper money backed by government debt. They could print currency up to the value of what the crown owed them. This created money directly from borrowing. The government's promise to pay became legal tender, and the more the government borrowed, the more money could be created. This became the template that every modern nation would eventually adopt. Government borrows, never repays the principal, pays interest eternally, and the debt itself becomes the foundation of the money supply. It's brilliant if you're receiving the interest payments. It's devastating if you're the taxpayer funding them forever. Within 50 years, every major European power had copied the model. France established similar arrangements. The Netherlands formalized government bond issuance. And by 1790, the newly independent United States explicitly modeled its financial system on the Bank of England. Alexander Hamilton studied Patterson's creation and replicated it across the Atlantic. Permanent debt, interest extracted from taxes, bonds traded as currency. The trap was set 3 centuries ago, and every government since has walked into it willingly. Today, the Bank of England still exists. British government debt has never been eliminated. It's been refinanced, restructured, and expanded, but never paid off. The system Patterson designed in 1694 persists today, 330 years later. But creating permanent government debt was only the first step. The real power came from industrializing it, turning sovereign borrowing into a global marketplace where entire nations could be controlled through financial leverage. That innovation came from a family of bankers who understood that controlling the flow of credit meant controlling the flow of power itself. Controlling the flow of power itself. By the early 1800s, European governments had embraced debt as a tool of statecraft. They borrowed for wars, infrastructure, and daily operations, but each loan was negotiated individually. Interest rates fluctuated wildly. Only the wealthiest merchants could participate in government financing. There was no organized market, no standardized system. That changed when Nathan Rothschild revolutionized sovereign debt forever. The Rothschild family had started as money changers in Frankfurt. By 1800, 5 brothers had established banking houses across Europe's major financial centers: London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, Naples. This network was unprecedented. They could move money across borders faster than governments could move armies. And Nathan Rothschild in London was the strategic genius who weaponized this advantage. During the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan didn't just lend money to the British government. He transformed how sovereign debt functioned entirely. Instead of providing direct loans, he bought government bonds at a discount and resold them to investors at a markup. He created the first true secondary market for government debt. Britain needed money immediately. Rothschild provided it. Then he sold those bonds to pension funds, insurance companies, and wealthy individuals across Europe. The government got instant funding. Rothschild collected the spread between buying and selling prices. Investors got tradable assets that paid regular interest. Everyone won except the taxpayers who would service those bonds forever. But Rothschild's real innovation was positioning himself so that governments had no choice but to use his services. In 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild learned of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else in London. His courier network was faster than official government communications. He used this information advantage to manipulate the bond market with surgical precision. First, he sold British government bonds, signaling to other investors that Britain was losing the war. Prices collapsed as panic spread through London's financial district. Then, after driving prices to rock bottom, Rothschild quietly bought massive quantities of those same bonds at fire sale prices. When official news of British victory arrived the next day, bond prices exploded upward. Rothschild made millions in profit, not just from insider information, but from controlling market psychology itself. This established the Rothschild model that persists today. Control the information flow, control the issuance process, control the investor network. By 1820, if a government needed to borrow money, they went through the Rothschilds because the Rothschilds controlled access to capital. They had the distribution channels, they set the terms, they determined which nations could borrow and which would be frozen out. Here's why this matters for understanding today's debt trap. Before Rothschild, governments could theoretically refuse to pay their debts. If a king defaulted, his creditors lost money and the system reset. But Rothschild made sovereign debt internationally tradable and interconnected. A British bond might be owned by a French investor who used it as collateral for a loan from a German bank, who sold it to an Austrian pension fund. The web of ownership became so complex that defaulting wasn't just refusing one creditor. It meant potentially collapsing an entire international financial network. This is the Rothschild innovation that trapped governments permanently. Make debt so interconnected across borders that default becomes systemically dangerous, not just locally embarrassing. Governments became prisoners of their own promises. They had to keep paying interest, and they had to keep borrowing new money to pay interest on old debts. The debt trap was no longer just permanent, it became inescapable. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschild family was the wealthiest dynasty in Europe. richer than most kings. That wealth came from one source: interest payments on government bonds that would never be repaid. The Rothschild network had industrialized sovereign debt, but the system still needed one final component to reach its full potential. It needed a mechanism that could create unlimited demand for government bonds, ensuring that nations could borrow infinite amounts without ever worrying about finding willing lenders. That mechanism was the central bank, and its most powerful version was engineered in secret by American bankers who understood exactly what they were building. By 1900, America was becoming an economic powerhouse, but its financial system remained primitive compared to Europe. Banks operated independently. The money supply was tied to gold reserves. There was no central mechanism to coordinate lending or manage national debt efficiently. This changed when J.P. Morgan and his associates recognized that controlling America's monetary system meant controlling America itself. The financial panic of 1907 provided the perfect opportunity. When stock prices crashed and banks began failing, J.P. Morgan personally organized a bailout. He gathered the most powerful bankers in New York, locked them in his private library, and forced them to pledge their own money to stabilize failing institutions. The panic ended, but Morgan knew he couldn't repeat this performance indefinitely. The system is complete. 3 centuries of financial engineering have created a machine that runs on permanent debt, managed by central banks that can manufacture money at will, distributed through networks that make default impossible, and serviced by taxpayers who have no choice but to keep the payments flowing. Every government on Earth is caught in this web because the web is the global economy itself. We don't owe money to mysterious foreign powers or shadowy creditors. We owe it to the system that creates money from debt and debt from money. The lenders are us, the borrowers are us, and the interest flows eternally upward to those who designed the trap. Understanding this won't set you free, but at least now you know why the cage exists.